it's just like a part of my chemistry, and I was like, oh no. But I can actually move it around, so I was like, perfect.
Well, that's good. That's good. I thought Sherry was going to be here with us. She told me this was a good time for her, so I was trying to make sure that she could be in.
Yeah, her schedule is a bit of a. I don't think she has a regular schedule, but that's how it is, I think, for her.
I guess that, yeah. Well, I mean, when you're a farmer, that's just how it is.
Yeah, things just pop up.
Yep. She tries to be regular, though, about when she walks her goats and all that. So.
Yeah. But not easy.
Hmm.
All right. So, problem for estuary and the hole that it's trying to fill, I guess.
Why do you see that as a problem, just out of curiosity?
Well, it's not like a problem. It's like, what is it, I guess, trying to fill? Like, not, like, I don't see it as a problem. I see it as, I guess it's a purpose designation that I'm thinking of. So, like, how exactly is its purpose going to play out, and what purpose is it filling?
Gotcha.
That's sort of, I guess, what I mean by problem identification. Um, is what problem in the outside world is it trying to solve? And I was thinking about it, and I think a bunch of people would sort of jump to the conclusion of it would solve the problem of the meaning crisis, sort of if you want to go John Fakey. Um, and I think that's part of it, but I think that specific topic of meaning crisis is too big too big of an issue for this to solve.
Right.
So, um, so I think, well, I sort of thought of like a definition, a loose definition of what estuary sort of would be, and I really mean it loose because it's supposed to be something that's it's going to be different every place you go.
Right.
So um, to cage it in would also sort of reduce its metaphorical uh, usage as well. So and so my thoughts were that sort of as a definition, it's an environment that's creates a culture focused on diversity of thought and perspectives, and it's curated from people not from a distinct group, um, religious or otherwise, group. So no like distinct group or like label that people would have, and it's really, I think, focused on thoughts and thinking through different thoughts that people bring. And I mean, that's sort of how I think about it. If you wanted to go definition sense.
Yeah, and so that's where I saw a problem. Is like if we try to define it too narrowly, then it becomes something that it shouldn't,
Yeah.
you know. And so that's what I was trying to avoid. I think it's really Peterson 2.0, but it's not him. It's
Right.
everyone that he was able to reach,
Yeah.
because he kind of built an estuary. If you think about it, lots of people that came to his biblical lectures were either Christian or not. Like
Yeah.
that, to me, that was like the biggest thing that he did. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, he had his book tours and all that, and all that was good. And his 12 Rules for Life, like that's a good book.
Yep.
But those biblical lectures brought people that were definitely everywhere on the map with that kind of stuff, brought them together. So he had built a very small estuary inside all these places, or inside this one place that he visited to do biblical lectures. And then that kind of spread out and it built ones outside of that.
Yep.
So that's what I see it as, is like Peterson 2.0, but not having it be surrounded by him. It's like once
Yeah.
you attach that name to it, well, when that name falls away, then what? You know?
Yep. Yeah, that's sort of like the culture figurehead problem that we were discussing last week.
Right.
Um, and yeah, that's a good point though. And I was thinking about the Jordan Peterson meetups that happened and how, in, a, in more or less, the meetup culture brought into existence the Discord, and then from there, all those other things that have happened. So that's sort of an estuary as well. But then I guess so. I guess when I went from that definition and then you know from that you could, I mean, I said I wrote some notes down, and so I mentioned the meaning crisis already, and then um, I didn't get fully through it, but it's, I guess the hole that estuary will would fit in best is the it would be able to solve a lack of discourse and lack of diverse thought, because I think that's what um, in general is lacking. And um, I couldn't, yeah, it's just like an environment of diverse thought. I couldn't really go much further than that, and like where specifically it would fit.
Um, that's what it should be, because
Yeah,
we've seen we're seeing two different sides of the culture right now. Like if people are really paying attention, there is a movement where people want those spaces, where they want the diversity of thought spaces, where it's like they don't want to be in their little tribal bubble. But then there's the other people that do. And so it's really hard to put your finger on, but there is a large group that would engage in estuary conversations.
yeah,
It's just how do you get that word out there?
yeah. How do you, and also last week, yeah, that's sort of what we talked about, and also how do you generate the right environment. And I think, yeah, how do you describe it to the broad public, and how do you create the environment, the right environment, I think are like the two biggest problems. Um, and so I think it feels part of the problem of not having the diversity of thought and having those open discourse environments. Um, and then where it goes from there, I have trouble thinking through. Um, it's like I can't develop farther with that thought, and my gears aren't turning. as well. They're missing. So I feel like I had to roll a little bit last night, but I didn't write any notes down. So
Uh, I think for the most part, we built, like we talked about, we built that culture already into this Discord server. It's just, I don't want to say it's how do you scale it up, but how do you scale it out, you know? Because the server exists as a scale up from the local meetup. But then it's like, okay, now how do we scale that out further?
yeah, how do you like cast the nets?
And it's hard because you're trying to surround it with something that isn't a person.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and that's the really difficult part.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you say Christianity, people think, oh, well, we know what that means. There was this guy named Jesus Christ and they're followers of him, or, you know, and it was easier for Paul because he can say, well, this is surrounding this one person, Jordan Peterson. And we could try to say, like, oh, this is a Paul Vanderklight thing, but then we run into that problem that we've already discussed. So it's like, how do you scale that outward?
Yeah. Yeah. How do you?
And then it starts to get fuzzy because then we have to think, well, like it's got to be marketed somehow. And then once you throw that term in there, it's like, well, it's going to be marketed. Somebody has to sell it. How are you going to sell it to a pastor? And then we don't like using those terms because in order to sell it to somebody, then they're thinking, just like we said last time, what's the return on investment? And it's like, these are not easy problems to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. As And the issue is that, like, I was thinking of, like, how would I be able to describe this maybe to, like, you know, priest I have in Maine? Like, how would I be able to describe this? And it's like, and he actually knows Jordan Peterson. So it's like, I have, like, that little advantage, but it's still, like, I would still have to use a figurehead, in a sense, to describe it. Like, oh, it's sort of like a group around the culture that Jordan Peterson brought, in a way. But then it would sort of like jump to meetup. And it's like, but it's not exactly that. It's almost like we're trying to build a structure with where there is almost nothing, and it actually makes sense because you don't really build anything in estuary; you just sink in the mud.
Right.
So, um, and I think that's part of the issue. But I think it's also a issue that we almost need to figure out how to have something really level that like disperses the weight over all of the mud or something so that you can actually not have the structure sink in. So
Right. Hey,
um
Cabo.
Hey, Troy.
howdy.
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? It's like Raveki has his religion that isn't a religion, but we're trying to build a church that's not a church. You
Yeah.
know? and and to be quite honest, that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a structure around something that's not surrounded by a person,
Yeah.
but surrounded by ideas.
Yeah.
And here's the trap we fall into when when Jesus left, there was nothing left, right? It's like, so of course, all these things sprang up. It's like, oh, here's the church surrounding Peter, and here's one around Paul, and here's one around, right? Because the ideas won't sustain long enough without it being attached to a person. So that's the problem we're trying to solve. It's like, how do you do that? How do you attach what this thing is to the ideas and not to a person who embodies those ideas?
Well, and you've got to balance that as well, because you can become a cult of personality on one side, but you can also become an ideology on the other. So
Right.
you're so balancing on the mode of thinking, not what's the thought, thinking is that's what we're trying to do openly. We're trying to think together and not just fixate on an ideology.
Yeah, it's like open thought. Because like before, I mean, before you were here, I sort of mentioned like I sort of ran through a bit of my definition, and a lot of it hinged on diversity of thought and being able to express that and having the environment of diversity of thought. Um, yeah,
Well, because I mean, that's an old Greek forum.
yeah, mm-hmm.
Um, and that's pretty much what this is. Like, you know, we've kind of messed up that word because a forum nowadays is just a message board, really. It's a slower version of what Discord is, but uh, this is an open courtyard where everybody can walk into the middle and start talking. And I think it's even easier than that because, um, especially on Discord itself, if you are in the chat room, you can just start talking or say, "Hey, I've got an idea," and you don't have to you don't have to elbow in that much. Uh-oh, we lose him?
I think we lost him. But, you know, and he brought up a good point. It's we're trying, like, how are we trying? What is the problem in the culture that we're trying to solve with estuary?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that, you know, that's a good question. What are we trying to solve here? And then how do you scale it out? Not up, but out. How do you make it, and I hate to use this term, but how do you make it marketable?
Have you ever seen Accepted?
No, I haven't.
It's a really good movie. I'd say it's in my top 10 because it shows you it Accepted is a movie that shows you what what if we were allowed to just learn, because it's about these kids that can't get into any colleges and so they make one. It's a comedy, it's ridiculous, it's crass, but the idea there is profound because their their curriculum is, well, what do you want to learn? And you tell them, he's like, okay. And they hand you a marker and you write it on the whiteboard. And anybody else who wants to learn that can select that class, and you've got your room number right next to what you want to learn, and you just teach yourselves. You learn together. That's it.
What movie?
Accepted. And that's kind of what we're doing. It's you know, it's church without church, religion without religion, but also a school without a building. It's that kind of open learning idea or open thought. Um, it's not new, but it's difficult because institutions don't want to support that because it can't be regulated.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue with regulation on something like that is like, okay, there's things you don't want to teach, but how about you just like it's the same exact problem as social media. Just use actual law as a guideline, and you're not going to run into people anymore. If you govern off of free speech, you're going to be fine. That guy's calling for violence. Okay, he's not allowed to be here anymore. If that's already in the law, we don't need to make up a guideline for that. Um, these guys are teaching how to make bombs. Okay, that's already illegal. you know, you can't do that. That kind of thing. It's an open idea that's hard to regulate, and people who have control issues, which is a lot of corporations, would not support that. So it has to be a grassroots thing.
Yeah, of course it would have to be very bottom up, because it relies on the individual very heavily. And
I don't know. We could collectively come together and found the South Harmon Institute of Technology as a reference to the just to tell you how ridiculous that movie is. What's the acronym of that? So, but it's a template of what we're doing. What do you want to talk about? What do you want to learn? Write it on the whiteboard.
yeah, it's not exactly like, I wouldn't say it's totally focused on learning, but in a sense you will, because when you're talking to people, you learn. And I just learned about this movie, so there's evidence of it right there. So, and yeah, that's more in like the strict school sense, but it still works. And
Well,
I,
someone was asking about death on the Discord earlier, and so people were having a conversation about it. And so you just bring up a topic, and a class can explode around this topic
yeah,
of
hmm
delving into the idea of death. And so
yeah,
it's very organic, and it can work very quickly. It doesn't have to take 6 months of a course to learn something. You can actually learn something in a day to a week, depending.
yeah. I've definitely learned a bunch from the server. So, um, actually, I really like the whiteboard idea, just as like a structure in the environment. Um,
Hmm.
if we're like thinking of physical structures, like what do you want to talk about tonight? Just go up and write it down, and then say why you want to talk about it. Something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
if you had a meetup that's like 20 people and, you know, uh, maybe the topics get written down and then it's like, oh, 5 people want to talk about this and 10 people want to talk about this and the other 5 want to talk about this. And then they just split up into groups and talk about
Yeah,
or it leaves a lot of room like that. But again, I see the problem that you're proposing, Andrew, and it's how, like, what is the thing in the culture that we're trying to solve with SGA?
yeah,
And it's not that we don't know what it is, it's just how do you articulate it in a way that brings others on board, you
yeah,
know? And that's the biggest problem I see with the discussions that have surrounded it so far. Like, I hear what these admins on the side of the server are saying. Like, I understand that it's got to be somehow marketable, but the problem they're having is how do you market that?
yeah. Like if you want to go Petersonian, you can say, how is this a tool, basically? And of course, tool has not the greatest connotation, but if you're using it sort of, I'm going to use it in the Peterson context where it's like almost everything more or less a tool. And so how would you, um, the issue that I see is that we don't have we don't have something that's like a wrench. It's we just have mud basically, and you can't really um, fix anything with mud. Um, and so
You need a little bit of straw in that.
yeah,
Well,
and
not
so
according to Pharaoh. You got to build the bricks, and he's not going to give you straw.
Yeah.
That's your punishment. Here's the mud, no straw. Build the same amount of bricks as you built yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
yeah,
Nolan.
Hi.
But and the marketing thing is the problem, and that's why I've said it's got to be the right people articulating it, but then it also has to be, we're not selling you a product here where you're going to get any return on investment. What we're saying is there's people inside your church that have these thoughts that you might think is heretical. It's already happening.
yeah,
And here's some people that are outside the church that might be thinking somewhere around the same thing. And if you could get those people together, and some people that are in the church that may not have these thoughts, but may have different thoughts, and just for the church create a space where these people can talk through these things, that would be beneficial. And
yeah,
here's a
and then
loose blueprint of how it's already worked, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sure that was not easy for Paul to take to his church and go, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to be doing this kind of meetup thing.
yeah, yeah,
That's not an easy sell, so to speak, but the problem is we have to find a way to market it. And as much as I don't want to, that's how you have to market it. Here's a blueprint of something that's worked.
yeah, and that's sort of why I outlined my definition a little while
And I
ago.
think that
Like
was a
you also,
good definition.
thank you. But yeah,
What's the definition?
it's more or less an environment that creates a culture or focused on diversity of thought, perspectives, and is curated from people uh, not from a distinct group. So not, you know, attached. They don't have like a label on them, basically.
Hmm.
And so it's really just focused on the thoughts and the thinking and the processing and just being people in a sense.
Yeah, that's a pattern. The pattern I'm seeing in that is that these are all iron girders. These are all frames. Like these are not buildings, and that's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for um, a
It's like a sandbox.
yeah.
Each
It's a
sandbox is different, and that's sort of why like
yeah,
each
and
estuary is
there's
going to be
there's
different.
no walls. It's an open space. There's not even a roof, but there's
Yeah,
an area,
yeah,
and the what we want is the bare minimum of structure, just so that we can sit together and talk.
yeah,
And that seems I think that's something in what Job said was like, oh, this is never going to work. I understand where he's coming from
yeah,
with that, because it's not going to work, it's working. We're already doing it. That's the thing.
yeah,
The difference between the Discord now and what we're trying to do is marketing.
yeah. And well, and also that it's in a physical environment rather than on the internet. That's the other issue.
Well, and that's another thing, is that you talk about physical stuff like having to, gather together or get into a big like mega church idea, or or go down to the local school and rent a classroom for Saturday or something. and those are levels in a concept. But then we also have to take into consideration what we're doing right now is that it seems like when this is discussed, it's discussed as if it has to be physical. And the way that I'm seeing things trending is that it's that being online, like, COVID aside, it's being online is easier, and the path of least resistance seems the easiest for people. It seems like this is the way that things are going to flow, regardless of whether we want it to. Um, so I think, or at least I have an idea that um, building a framework in which we can have the most thought and activity flowing through, uh, it almost sounds like I'm proposing making another social media program, and I'm not. But I mean, like, using the analogy of news, is news has trickled down from everybody getting a newspaper to the majority of people watching one of two channels, or everyone else leaving the TV behind entirely and watching the news on YouTube.
Yeah. So
And the majority of the views of the recent conventions has been online. It
yeah,
hasn't it hasn't been through CNN or C-SPAN and that kind of thing.
yeah. So I think you're mostly correct, but I think
I
the
think
issue is
physical needs to be an aspect. I'm just saying that
there's
it's.
downsides to it being all, online,
Oh
because
yeah,
like
I want to shake Charlie's hand, but
yeah. So like I think you're right, but I I think focusing on the harder question is probably more important, and that's sort of why I'm focused on the how do we make it physical, because that's much more of a bigger issue, because like we're already sort of doing it right now is online. um
well, that's the evangelism issue that you have in the church anyway. Is that okay? How
but
do
yeah,
I
it's the
how
culture.
do how do I invite my friends to church? Is a constant question when you're growing up in the church. How do I invite my friends? I can't invite my friends. I'm embarrassed with this place, or I can't talk to them about this stuff. It just gets into an argument or something like that. And or I don't have many friends here. It's like my situation right now is that I know like one person in my neighborhood, and the only person in this area um, that I could meet up with is Cassie, and she's our that way. So
Well, I think the problem Andrew is posing here is it has to be physical, and it's not like the whole how can I invite my friends to church.
mm,
It's more of a I don't know enough people that are thinking about this that aren't online,
Yeah,
right? And that says a lot because you're attending college, Andrew. Like before COVID shut down, you should have known quite a few people that would be thinking this way
mm,
in a university setting, and they're
yeah,
not.
yeah,
So it's like I somehow, I guess it was because of where Paul lived, like that place was right for that kind of meetup at that time. Like it was just perfect things fell in line. And at some point, we're going to have to say, like, yes, we want these things to be physical meetups. And I think it can happen. It's going to take a lot of persistence about getting to the right people to even allow us to rent a space. And it's going to take a whole lot of times of, you know, maybe you're showing up by yourself. You invited people, but maybe you're the only one there and you sit there for an hour and nobody shows up. But you go do it next week anyway. Like a lot of that is what it's going to take to get it off the ground. Mm-hmm. And I hate saying that, but we have to look at it and go, okay, until that happens, right now, this is the best we have. As we continue to talk through it and be like, how can we make it physical in person? So that's the best I can do with trying to understand where you're coming from, Andrew, because I get it. I do.
I guess what I kind of heard when Kevin was talking was kind of like having a framework that's flexible in a way where it can, if it needs to, accommodate like online meetings, but also be able to like bridge to the physical meetings where there's this, yeah, kind of this framework, or maybe culture might be a better word, where it's able to do online if that's the best that whatever certain situation can offer, but then also be a way to maybe like lead people towards eventually meeting in person. I don't know if that makes sense, but a kind of, yeah, flexible framework that could work for both online and in person, depending on the situation.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're at already, because sometimes in person it's not possible, to put it as lightly as I can.
There's there was this guy, and I think he was in Michigan, a pastor friend that my dad knew. He would go to restaurants and coffee shops with this sign on the back of his laptop, and he would put the screen up, and the sign said, "I'm a pastor, would you like to talk?" And he would just sit there doing work on his laptop, and people would walk up to him and start talking and asking questions and all of this stuff. So there's a space for stuff like that. You can open up like, hey, like if if you have a sign on the back of your laptop, do you want to think about things, or I don't know, I don't know, there'd have to be a certain tagline or something, but it's like, do you want to think freely, can we have a conversation about anything? And you open that up in a in a in a Starbucks, you're going to get a different crowd from opening it up in an IHOP. Of course, you might get the same crowd, because I actually know people who go to both places, especially the IHOP at 1 a.m. crowd is usually the same people that go to Starbucks. But you'll find people will want to talk. I think that's something Paul said recently, is that ask them about themselves and people will talk about themselves. Just get them talking is the goal. And I think that's accurate, because there's a whole lot of scenarios in which you feel like you're not being listened to. You know, especially in a work environment or something, or you know, or school, and people want to be heard. And so, in the middle of a conversation, like there's no options. You can't not hear the other person in the conversation. That's not how a conversation works. And so it is simultaneously opening them up, uh, getting thoughts flowing, and also it's therapeutic.
Yeah, can we have like a conversation about anything isn't actually that bad. Like I think it could actually, I mean, you probably get some random people that walk up to you and start talking about, I don't know, something strange, but or
Yeah,
some
occasionally
sort
you're
of
going to get an Alex Jones, but
yeah,
that's okay too.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that would be interesting.
Kind of like a Steven Crowder change my mind table.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Except for
exactly.
this, the sign just says, "I will literally talk to you about anything,"
yeah.
and then just record it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or not.
Or
Just
not.
Or
Yeah.
not.
yeah,
Just sit and talk with people and
have
say, "Hey, next time
coffee.
if you want to talk about literally anything, I'm going to sit over here inside this building where it's air conditioned, and you come talk to me about literally anything, and bring your friends too."
Yeah,
Yeah. And as soon as things, open back up a bit, it'll be a lot more viable to do something like that. Um, but there is an option, a change my mind desk. It's kind of
yeah,
like a lemonade stand for thinking.
yeah. We'll have
Yeah,
coffee. It'll be coffee stand conversations.
exactly.
That's how you'd get me. You just
Conversation
have
stand.
coffee. You just have coffee. I'll just walk up and be like, perfect.
Yeah,
You can
somebody setting up a booth out there, and if they have coffee, I'm on it. Especially if it's free, I'm there.
free coffee.
I'm
Coffee
there.
and conversation.
You know, well, it reminds me. There's the Walmart Supercenter closest to me. There's ladies out there at least once a week, and they're just sitting on the tailgate of a pickup, and they have a cardboard sign that says, "If you need prayer, we're here." And it's just like, huh. It never fails. Once a week, they're there, no matter what. And it's like, but that's a good way to market it, especially if you're in a visible high traffic area. Just sit out there with a little fold up table and, you know, have coffee ready and say, come on, we can talk about anything. And I'm not going to judge you. If you say something stupid, I'm just going to be like, that's interesting. Or something that I find stupid. Maybe you don't, but maybe I think it's stupid.
Yeah, where it's like,
Interesting.
why do you think about this or something like that?
Well, and
Just
what
ask questions, basically.
to what Andrew was saying is that you can have um, a shoot. It left. I had the idea and it's gone. Sorry.
Your train has crashed.
Yeah.
But like I said last time, I pick on the churches because they have the buildings that are open during the week, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, but Jess brought up a lot of good points in his talk with Paul. I don't know if you guys have watched that yet.
Who?
Jess.
Oh yeah,
Jess.
I watched like half of it.
Yeah, he brought up a lot of good points talking about like his places where he sees it might fail. Like,
Yeah.
and not to be nitpicky, he's just bringing up like he's bringing up good cautions. And the
Yeah.
only problem I saw with that conversation is he kept saying the estuary. He's like trying to say, "Tell me what to do, Paul, and I'll go do it." And it's like, but you're missing the point. Or at least that's how I perceived it. Now, he did bring up a lot of good stuff, and I watched it twice because I'm like, okay, I'm trying to get a feel for this, you know?
Yeah.
But, and then I loved Paul's response. He's like, I hear these people saying, give me estuary. And he's like, it's not something I give you, it's something we do together. And I'm like, yes, okay, there.
Or it's what you give others.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, there's your definition. It's something we do together. It's like, perfect. There you go. Problem solved.
Yeah.
Well, it's biblical. Yeah. Where two or three are gathered together, there am I. It's a gathering. It's not a program.
Yeah. It's not like a very constrained structure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He's saying it is what you make it. Like, as long as you're open to the ebbs and flows of both the river or lake and salt water coming and going, like, as long as that's what it is, that's estuary. However you have it structured, however it's loosely organized, whatever, that's exactly what it is. It's something we do together. It's, here's the walled garden, here's the water flowing out of the walled garden, here's the salt water, which is the rest of the world, the culture, right? And this is where the two are intermingling. It's like, as long as that pond where the two coexist is there, that's it. You've got it. You've got estuary.
Yep.
That's why he doesn't want to like give it this hard line definition of this is what it is and this is what it is. Well, not this is what it is, but he is willing to say like this is what it's not.
Yeah, and that's sort of why I prefaced my definition by it's very loose, like really just culture, diversity of thought, and that's more or less it.
It's kind of like the Constitution. It's easier, not easier. It's more effective to have negative rights where it says shall not. Those are more effective than saying, okay, this is allowed and this is allowed and this is allowed. It's what shouldn't it be is a lot easier on the people.
Well,
trying
that's
to
how
figure
you always
something
start
out.
by defining it, is by defining what it's not.
Yeah.
So
it's
that was why,
cutting away.
Right, and that was why in the video that I posted about what I wanted this to be, I was very specific about what it's not. It's not this, it's not this, it's not. Because then after we get out of the way what it's not, then it's like there's a whole possibility of everything that it could be. And it's like, that's kind of where I want to leave it. It's like, this is a startup project, here's the things that it's not, but there's a whole lot of things that it can be.
Yeah.
The only thing I can say that it is conversation.
Right. That's exactly what it is.
Because that encompasses everything about it. You're not going to have a conversation by yourself, and you can't do conversation quietly. You're not just writing notes and passing them to each other. It is a gathering, and words have to be traded. And I think the whiteboard. Oh, okay. So that's where the whiteboard is a good idea. Is a good idea if you want to just have a really open discussion and just write something down as the topic. Um, but shoot, it came back and I didn't say it. Dang it. I'm sorry. I'm tired. It was something you said, Andrew. It was something you said about
Culture, environment, diversity of thought. I'm just trying to roll off.
It was a really good point, and I've tried to capitalize on it twice, and it just keeps escaping me.
Yeah, I mean,
Hey, Andrew, would you
yeah.
mind copying and pasting that definition and putting it in somewhere in the Outpost, either the general or resources?
The
One of the
definition
two.
I have.
Yeah, actually, just pop it in general. That way, others that might not be able to be here can see it.
Yeah.
Because I think that spot on nailed it. Like, it's loose enough that now it's like, okay, we have a definition of what it isn't, and this is what it is.
Yeah.
I really liked it.
Thank you. But yeah, I think I haven't listened to all of Jess, what he had to say, but I think he's right in that this is something that there's a lot of places where you can fail, and I think that's definitely like one of the other big problems is like finding out where all the pitfalls are. It's sort of like finding. I feel like estuaries maybe they have quicksand. It's like where are you gonna get sucked in? And um, that should definitely be something that is discussed on a larger scale. But I think another thing that I wanted to bring up is I was thinking about another randomized randos, and another topic. And one of my thoughts was the problem that I highlighted last time we talked, which was how do you separate a figurehead from a culture? And I would find it interesting to see what people would have to say about that process because I think that's quite pertinent because we can't have like a PVK estuary. We can't have a Jordan Peterson estuary. It's just blanket estuary. So I find, I don't know, any thoughts?
Yeah. These topics have to be able to stretch outside of a person, whereas the Jordan Peterson meetups were had a draw to them because of the name. Yes, the Jordan Peterson meetup, you'll get 20 people. Paul Vanderklay meetup, you'd probably get one.
Yeah,
Maybe
and
five.
that would be yourself.
Yeah.
Guys, I got about 5 minutes before I have to go. So
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it's got to be able to be church without church, a school without school. It's there's so many knots going on here.
and I think that's why Job said it's going to fail. Like he's coming at it from a masculine perspective, saying, no, we have to define what it is, and it has to be organizational and institutional, Like all, like that's where his mind goes. And sure, because
Well, he's a
his
programmer.
background and what he does,
Yeah.
like that's how his mind is gonna try to
Yeah.
do it. It's like, okay, here's a container, and here's all the code inside that container, and
He
like it
goes
has
to the
here.
tool. He
Yeah.
goes to the tool, and the issue is we don't really have a fully formed tool yet. We just have mud.
We need
And
it.
the thing is, it could turn into like mudslinging, and then it would die. So.
Well, he's trying to, along with your mud analogy, he's trying to build bricks. We don't need bricks. We need to make a really big pot.
We need to just have like an area liner or something where like this is where you dive in, something like that. You know.
Yeah, but this is the diving zone.
Well, no, I'm like, that was my thought last week, right? Is you go to a public pool, and it's not like the first place you get in is 10 feet deep. It's like you walk in from like ankle deep down, right? And like my idea is this part is the ankle deep part, right? And then maybe somebody will come along and add an extra step to that where it's like, okay, this is the 2.5 or 3 foot, and then I think it's got to be one of those things where you ease in. And
Yeah.
that's why I like the idea of estuary, because it's both and. You're not getting all of the freshwater creatures, and you're not getting all of the saltwater creatures. It's like it's just the spot where there's just a little bit of both, where they coexist in one little space. It's like that's good.
The idea came back.
Do it. Say it right now.
You said you mentioned recording.
Yep.
And I said, I was going to say, someone says or not recording if they're not comfortable with that. That's also an option too. But I think there can be levels of recording where it's like, okay, do you just want to record this audio? You don't want people to see you, but just have an open conversation, that kind of thing. Because there can be like, hey, these, you post that online, hey, these kind of conversations are happening. We can talk about anything. It's like, listen to these, especially like if, with it, we're able to get into almost anything. If you got two people, especially those who are on opposite ends of a political spectrum or an idea, and they have a good conversation, you want to post that. Because it's just like, hey, we can talk. It actually works.
Yeah.
And that would be a good, even if they don't want their face on the internet, you can, just do an overlay and audio. Yep. Which is basically the beginning of Michaela Peterson's podcast, is that lion symbol. It's like a lion wearing a tie or something.
Yeah.
Because the lion is the ultimate carnivore. All right, guys, so I'm going to have to get.
All right.
You have to get going.